when 8-player Smash was announced, it was a wild concept. At the time, playing with up to 4 players on the same console was standard for most games, with the Wii U booting that up to 5, although that ability was rarely used. For 8 players, that was insane. With the Switch and how the Joy-Con work, 8-player Smash becomes even more accessible and will likely become a staple of the franchise. I rarely have 8 people to play with, but I often like to dabble with it with CPU opponents. It's manic, but a lot of fun. I've always found Fire Emblem's situation to be fascinating. It's the only franchise where you can do a full 8-player Smash with every character on stage at the same time. Sure, there are also 8 Pokémon characters, but one of those is a multi-character, so it doesn't really feel like that counts. You can do a full-on brawl with 8 Fire Emblem characters. That's honestly pretty cool. This idea has always captivated me, and I thought, what if every franchise got that treatment? I spent a couple of weeks going to every Smash franchise's subreddit to see who people would choose as their 8 definitive characters in Smash. For some franchises, I haven't played much or any of them, so it makes more sense for me to ask the people who know the most about them. And even the ones I know a lot about, I wanted to see what other people thought. I've built a roster of 8 for every franchise, and that is what I will show you today. Despite getting other people's opinions, I did ultimately make the final decision myself. I wanted to get opinions and find out who people would want, but I also wanted to hit different types of characters and represent each franchise as a whole as best as I could. This was not always easy, but I did my best. My one specific rule was no multi-characters like Pokemon Trainer or Pirate and Mithra. It's all very well saying that they should stay together, but multi-characters are effectively 2 characters in one, so this would be like including 9 characters, not 8. It's just a big loophole people could exploit. And think of it this way, if multi-characters were included, then even though you can do an 8-player match with every character, not every character can be on screen at the same time. Anyway, let's start with the first franchise in Smash, Mario. I'm going by Smash's own rules and logic here for the most part, so no Wario, Yoshi or Donkey Kong rep as they're their own franchise. Obviously, Mario will be here as well as Luigi, Peach and Bowser. These are incredibly important, arguably the 4 most iconic video game characters ever. I'd also say that in this concept, Rosalina and Bowser Jr. would be there too, seeing as they are both popular and important characters in modern Mario. The last 2 slots would be much the same as my Smash prediction, Captain Toad and Waluigi. Waluigi is just that much a fan favourite request, and Toad is the most iconic Nintendo character not in Smash, and Captain Toad just gives him something akin to an interesting moveset potential. Obviously, this means that Piranha Plant, Daisy and Dr. Mario would be cut, and Piranha Plant and Doc seem obvious, but some people might be more confused by Daisy. However, I do feel that of the secondary princesses, Rosalina is just used in more significant ways, and is the one they seem to push significantly more, plus has more scope for uniqueness. And in comparison to Waluigi, well, Waluigi is such a hotly wanted character in Smash that Daisy couldn't possibly compare with that. On to the Donkey Kong franchise, and DK himself would obviously stay, as would Diddy and K. Rool. Rounding out the usual Kong cast would be Dixie and Cranky, and heck, throw Funky Kong in there as well. It gets a bit dicey towards the end here, but I think adding Donkey Kong Jr. in for some arcade rep makes sense. And then, finally, while a lot of people wanted another minor Kong, Lord Frederick from Tropical Freeze actually got a lot of mentions, and this adds not just another villain, but also some pretty good variety. Zelda's core 3 of Link, Zelda and Ganondorf would stay strong here, with Link taking his Ocarina design, Zelda keeping her Link to the Past design, and Ganondorf having his Tears of the Kingdom design. I would, however, cut the other 2 Links as they aren't really necessary. Sheik would also be gone, but Impa would be coming in to fill a similar niche with her Skyward Sword design. Tingle would be the final recurring character to be added as something of a joke character, using his Wind Waker design. Then we get to the one-offs, and Skull Kid is such an obvious choice and certainly one of the most wanted characters. Then there would be Midna, who used to be a massively requested character, and that is good enough for me. Finally, I wanted another villain, and there were many options, but I went for Vati, mostly because it means every character would represent a different game or set of games, plus a lot of people mentioned him. Metroid is a fairly tough one, due to the franchise being based around isolation and Samus coming up against massive creatures that would be too big and not appropriate for a scaled down design like Ridley. Samus would return, but I tried to avoid using characters in this that are the same person as another, so Zero Suit is gone. Ridley would return, as would Dark Samus, but with a new moveset. Ravenbeak has been an incredibly popular pick of late, and I think he would be a must here, and Psylocke seems pretty popular and speculated to be important in the future, so throw him in there as well. From here, you would mostly have to focus on other bounty hunters, and Rundus was a big one many suggested, and of the rest I think Gandrada seems interesting. Finally, a lot of people suggested a Metroid of some form, and a Mega Metroid seemed a pretty good stage to base it on. Yoshi was a tricky one. I wanted to avoid Baby Mario and Baby Bowser, not just because Baby Bowser has such a similar design to Junior, but also because I wanted to avoid using canonically the same character for multiple slots. Yoshi and Kamek are the easy spots, and Poochie makes sense as a third, but that is all the major characters done. Bert the Bashful as a recurring boss works, and Raphael the Raven has had a few appearances in the franchise, so I added him as well. I also added Don Bongo from Yoshi's Story to wrap that game and just to have something else before having to delve into generic enemy territory. Of these, the only ones common enough in the games while also feeling specific to Yoshi's Island are the Bandit and the Ukiki. Kirby is not lacking for choices, and the main four of Kirby, Meta Knight, King Dedede and now Bandana D would be a shoo-in. Marx is so iconic that it would be hard to miss him out, and Magalore has become incredibly popular too. From here it was basically a grab bag of characters, but I decided to go for Gooey and Adeline. Star Fox takes place mostly in spaceships, but there are plenty of characters to choose from. The core Star Fox team, Fox, Falco, Peppy and Slippy all make sense to add, with Wolf as a popular antagonist and Smash returner, and Crystal as a character who has been incredibly highly requested in the past. Andros actually has a design which isn't just a massive floating head, so he gets in too. And for the last one, again, it's basically just a toss-up between a bunch of characters, but I decided that Leon worked well. Pokémon is one of the franchises I unfortunately got very few responses on, mainly because the post got hidden for a good chunk of time. Fortunately, I know Pokémon well enough to get by. Pikachu, Charizard and Mewtwo are the biggest Gen 1 icons, so they needed to be here. Lucario and Greninja are insanely popular, so I wouldn't pass them up. And Mimikyu getting the bronze medal in the Pokémon of the Year poll and having a massive merchandising presence means it would take the next slot. It gets trickier here though. I've never held with completing the fully evolved starter triangle, as none of the fully evolved grass starters feel popular enough, so no Sceptile, Decidueye or Meowscarada. Tinkaton is a great choice for a modern rep, and I would say Zoroark always felt like the one that got away when it comes to Smash, so these guys rounded out Pokemon's 8 characters. I have very little experience with the Mother series, but Ness, Lucas and Ninten always seemed obvious. Porky gives a good villain rep, and I was surprised to find that Gygus has a usable form too. The Masked Man gives another villain, but after this it gets harder as it basically comes down to the supporting cast. I decided Jeff and Kumatora would work from the options presented to me. F-Zero is infamous for having a character in Smash with an entirely made up moveset, but that works just fine honestly, and you could do the same with the rest of the characters. Captain Falcon, Blood Falcon and Black Shadow were the ones I was already sure I would include, but from the options everyone gave me, I decided to use Samurai Goro, Jodie Summer, Pico, Deathborn and Dr. Stewart. And here we are with Ice Climbers. This is where you would assume it would get tough, and yeah, a bit. But there are more options than you would expect. Ice Climbers themselves are one, and the Polar Bear a second, and most people are out for the count at this point, but there are other enemies and creatures in the game. For example, the Topi, a Yeti-like creature. Or is it a seal? Yeah, this enemy actually has 2 designs for different regions, and we're using both. One would be called Topi and the other Seal. Next are the Condor and the Nitpicker, and then from the arcade versions there are a bee and a butterfly we can use. And that's 8. See? That wasn't so hard, was it? Fire Emblem was an interesting one. There were some very obvious choices to keep. Marth being the closest the franchise has to a mascot, Ike its most popular character, and Robin from arguably its most important game. Quite a few people said Byleth, but a lot also forewent that for other Free Houses characters, mostly Edelgard, who it seems is considered the star of that game, even if not the playable protagonist. She also adds some female rep, as does Lyn, who also seems a pretty popular character. Tiki is another female, but also adds a dragon apparently, and this means we have some good weapon variety with an axe, some magic, a dragon and lots of swords. But let's round it out with Ephraim, who uses a lance. Finally, Black Knight gives us a villain. There were other options, so I just chose the ones that felt like they created the best balance. Game & Watch is another one that seems difficult, but there have been a bunch of different characters in various Game & Watch games. Mr. Game & Watch himself would stick around, but change his final smash so that Octopus could be added as well. Then there's the Wolf from Egg, Ziggy from Squish, John Solver and Dynamite Jack from Bomb Sweeper, and the Archaeologist from Goldcliff, who I called Cliff because who wants a character called Archaeologist? Then to round it out, we would have the cat who appears in various Game & Watch games. Kid Icarus was mostly easy. Pit, Palutena, and Dark Pit with a new moveset would all return. Hades and Medusa are the two most notable villains, and Viridi and Magnus seemed very popular. These 7 were almost always present in people's lists, but I went in a different direction for the last slot. Orcos from the Game Boy game. I think cool little additions like that would be fun. Now we have the last Mario sub-franchise, Wario. And here you're spoiled for choice. Wario was a must, and Ashley has always been very popular, so she would be there. 9V being based on video games would be a massive missed opportunity if passed up, and Jimmy T, Mona, Krygor, and Kat and Anna all seemed popular and notable enough. The last slot would be Captain Syrup from Wario Land, as we don't want it to be all WarioWare. A lot of people mentioned that including multiple snakes for Metal Gear would be redundant, even though they are distinct characters, so I stuck with just Solid for this. Then Raiden makes a lot of sense for a second rep, as well as significant or recurring characters like Revolver Ocelot, the Boss, and Volgin. Psycho Mantis is quite iconic, and Senator Armstrong is a popular villain, so both get in. And then finally, Otacon, as a sort of joke character, but a fair few people wanted him and came up with ways to make it work. Next is Sonic, and the vast majority of these options were unanimous. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy are the main protagonist cast, with Shadow being very significant to the franchise as well. People surprisingly didn't say Eggman as much as I expected, but that was mostly because they didn't think a moveset would work that well. I think that would be fine though, so I'm adding him. Metal Sonic was also on most people's lists, and the final slot was up for grabs between a few characters, including Rouge, Omega, and Blaze, but Silver seemed to crop up more than everyone else. Pikmin is difficult due to the fact that many characters would have mostly the same kinds of movesets, but people seem to suggest that Louie could have a more unique moveset and Alf could pick up a bunch of the Pikmin Olimar doesn't have. The President would also be there. Then we would have a Leafling and Oatchi in the mix, but for the last 2 places I decided to go with 2 bosses, Plasm Wraith and Emperor Bulblax, scaled down of course. For R.O.B, the choice here isn't massive, but it exists. Aside from R.O.B himself, Professors Vector and Hector are a start, and then we could add the Smick, Flipper, and Spike enemies from Stack Up and Gyromite. That's literally all the characters that exist though, so now we have to get creative. The blocks from Stack Up and the Gyro from Gyromite do appear to be the only options though, so yeah, this is one where the options are too lacking for us to get enough even resembling a character, and it won't be the last. I love Animal Crossing, and I think there is so much potential for characters in it. I didn't actually get many responses to this one, but I didn't need them. We already have Isabelle and Villager, but Tom Nook is too big an icon not to be added. Then I feel Mr. Rossetti, KK Slider, and Blathers are the next most iconic characters. For the final 2, there were so many options, but I chose Mabel, as the clothing store is pretty significant, and Katrina, because she feels like she could have an interesting moveset. For Mega Man, I wanted to avoid having multiple Mega Mans, but it seemed that having both Mega Man Classic and X was a necessity. Dr. Wily as the main villain makes too much sense, and Zero is a pretty big deal, so we will have him too. It gets a bit less clear here, but Sigma is another significant villain, and then I just chose from the next most popular choices, Proto Man, Tron Bon, and Roll. I love Wii Fit, but this was actually really tricky because I didn't want to add any Miis to this. Sure, I could add the chicken, but that's just a Mii in a costume. Fortunately, there were ways around it. Wii Fit Trainer is obvious, and Balance Board also makes sense, it being one of my most wanted characters. Wii Fit had dogs in it, and you could use this game to weigh your own pets, which was cool, so I'm going to add one of those. The Fit Piggy would be a fun addition too. For the rest, I had to go for specific entities that appear in the minigames. The Rhythm Boxing Robot, the Mole Boss from Segway, the Mud Monsters from Hose Down, and the Snowman from Snowball Fight. Sure, the latter 2 are technically Mii's, but not visually, and they would warrant a unique moveset. Next is Punch Out. I was expecting Little Mac, King Hippo, and Mr. Sandman, as they're the ones I know most about, but I needed help for the rest, as I don't know which other characters are popular. But Aaron Ryan, Super Macho Man, and Don Flamenco all seem to be. Glass Joe got a lot of love too, especially as a joke character. The final character I actually kind of decided myself, Doc Louie. Only one person pointed out the possibility, but I think this is a no-brainer, and I even have him on my updated Smash 6 prediction now. Next was probably the one I enjoyed the most, the Mii series. For this, I was counting the Mii fighters as a single character, to try and force a little more creativity in the choices. Matt was the obvious choice as a Wii Sports rep, and I honestly love this idea. Party Phil and Sebastian 2 also make too much sense for their respective games. I decided this would include more than just the Wii series, and I was looking for any character from a game starring the Miis, so Monitor was always going to be one of my picks, and given my love for Miitopia, I also wanted to add the Dark Emperor, maybe with the Mii whose face is being used randomly chosen from the ones on your console. And then from Street Pass we would have the Dark Lord. That's unfortunate. However, I found that it's also called the Dark Emperor, so we're calling it that, and thank God, because this would be such a cool choice. The final character is Nikki. I'd completely forgotten that she started life as a Mii, so she would absolutely count for this. And this is the kind of thing I'm glad I asked the subs for, because I wouldn't have remembered this otherwise. I didn't have very many ideas when it came to Pac-Man, but I did have one. Other than Pac-Man, my first pick was the Ghost Gang. Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde, except all at the same time. I disallowed multi-characters, but multiple characters on the stage at the same time is perfectly fine. I feel a moveset based on them all huddled together, but then you can use their individual movement patterns from the game to attack would be awesome. This also opens us up to a modern ghost design and moveset for Sue. Miss Pac-Man would also be added, and then I just added a few characters that a few people asked for. Erwin, Tockman, Spooky, and Mesmeralda. Next is Xenoblade, the first franchise I have played literally none of. The fact that Pirate and Mithra were not allowed to be a multi-character caused issues for some people, but I decided based on what was being said to go with Shulk, Elmer, Rex and Noah as the main protagonists. And then people brought a lot of good names to the table, so I chose Melia, Malos, Matthew and Mio. Hey, they all begin with M. And then we come to Duck Hunt. This is the one that is near impossible, so let's deconstruct what we have. The duck and dog will be separated, giving us Laughing Dog and Flock of Ducks. Then we would also have the Nez Zapper as its own character, mainly represented by a cursor on screen, which can be attacked. And then, well, I hope you like playing as a bush. Yeah, there are literally no other characters in the game, so I'm gonna have to scrounge together all the assets I can possibly find in the game. So that would be the clay pigeon, the bush, the tree, the mountain, and the grass. Some people said that I should combine the retros together or use the Nez Zapper characters in general instead of just Duck Hunt characters, but that didn't feel in the spirit of the challenge, and this is funnier anyway. I've not got the experience with Street Fighter to say for certain who should be added, but I did know that Ryu, Ken, Akuma, Chun-Li, and M. Bison were absolute musts. Cammy and Jury both seemed really popular too, and a lot of people also suggested Luke, despite him being much more recent. Final Fantasy is a massive RPG series, but I'm not an RPG person, so that makes this one another hard one for me. No matter though, Cloud and Sephiroth are already in, so we're keeping them there. And I've always liked the idea of Kefka, based on what I know about him, and a fair few people brought him up as well. Warrior of Light, a representative of the protagonist of the first game, was also a super popular choice, and I love the idea of repping such an early game. Vivi has also always been one I heard a lot about and seems quite unique, and of the remaining options people brought up, I decided that Lightning, Yuna and Noctis were a good choice. I love Bayonetta, so this seemed like it should be quite easy, but it was harder to come up with options than I thought, and then I was given too many. Bayo herself would be there, as well as John, Rodan and Viola. These are the obvious ones. Luca could also be there, but to use him you would realistically be better to have his Strider form as a part of his moveset. But having both a regular Luca and a Strider in one moveset would be a multi-character, so I decided to just have the Strider form because Strider is honestly so cool. Boulder and Singularity are both pretty great options for villains, and then I was gonna go for Cheshire, but no one really seemed to be that interested in him other than as a duo character for young Cereza, which I didn't like the idea of. And then someone said Alron, and I was sold. Next is Splatoon, and this one broke my heart. So firstly, we're getting Inkling, and many people also said Octling, but I hate that idea, as Octlings are basically just treated like Inklings, so separating them feels wrong to me. But make it more specific, and I'm down, and Agent 8 is absolutely perfect. The Squid Sisters as a duo character is such a cool idea, and I've always loved the idea of Off the Hook as a multi-character, but I myself disallowed them. And people made it clear that if you're gonna have just one, it has to be Pearl, due to her drone form. And that means not adding Marina, my favourite Splatoon character. And there isn't much wiggle room either. I wanted one slot for each of the idol groups, with the Squid Sisters as a duo character, Pearl as a solo character, and then from Deep Cut, Big Man. People said he doesn't like fighting and doesn't have much moveset potential, but his more unique body shape really lends itself to a moveset inherently, and neither Shiver nor Fry seemed all that interesting. DJ Octavio and Mr. Grizz would be excellent as villain reps, and Judd as a sort of joke character would be so much fun. Rest in peace, Marina. For Castlevania, Simon would always be there, but I actually replaced Richter with Trevor. He seems overall more popular, and I genuinely never heard of Richter before Smash, but I had heard of Trevor, so it feels like a positive change. Most people said all the Belmonts would play the same, but I think 2 is okay. Alucard and Dracula both made too much sense, and then Death, Soma, Cypher and Maria were mentioned quite a bit, so I figured I'd add them. I wouldn't even know where to start with Persona other than Joker, but people gave me plenty to work with. Well, I didn't get many responses, but there were some. Aegis I had heard of, mostly because one of my Twitter mutuals likes her, and then there was you, Makoto, Akechi and Marie. A few people said that reps from Persona 1 and 2 would never be added, but this hypothetical doesn't need to take into account whether it would happen when I'm adding 320 characters as is, so I decided to go for Naoya and Tatsuya. When it comes to Dragon Quest, I actually didn't want to directly use Hero, but Erdrick feels like an absolute must, seeing as he appears to be the most significant protagonist. As well as that, a lot of people also wanted to add the protagonist of 8, who I have to say also has my favourite hero design, and I decided to call him the 8th hero. Slime is such an iconic enemy, I couldn't leave it out. And Sorrow and Dragonlord seem to be popular villains. And then I chose Alina, Yangus and Torneko as so many people seem to want them. Banjo-Kazooie has a few obvious ones, mostly Banjo and Kazooie themselves, Gruntilda, Mumbo Jumbo and Klungo. Bottles and Jam Jars also got a lot of mentions, and then there was Humber, but I came across a thread of people discussing whether she was an insensitive Native American stereotype, and the consensus was probably, yeah, so I decided to avoid her. There weren't any standouts after this, so I went for Brentilda and the Lord of Games from Nuts and Bolts. After all, it's the only way Nuts and Bolts would get repped, and would act as a nice counterpart to Monitor. I genuinely have no idea when it comes to Fatal Fury, other than Terry and Mai. I was also not going to accept King of Fighters or general SNK characters. The characters had to be Fatal Fury characters. Joining Terry and Mai would be Andy, Joe, Kim, Mary, Geese and Rock. Then there's Arms, and frankly I doubt anyone could have changed my mind on this. Springman and Ribbleguard are the mascots, and Min Min and Twintail are the most popular characters. Then Max Brass and Dr. Kyle are the closest things the game has to antagonists, so they would be here. And Helix, being used for the training mode, feels baked into the DNA of the game, pun absolutely intended. The last one was much less clear, except for the fact that Kid Cobra is my main, and I adore him. And I also feel like he's the best option for a character that doesn't have to use the Arms moveset gimmick. His mix of boomerangs, slappy hands, and moving around like a breakdancer snake means he could just kinda do his own thing. Next was Minecraft, and there were some great options, but some of the early considerations like Zombie and Creeper just don't feel substantial enough for a full moveset. There were some mobs I decided to use though. Enderman, Piglin, Iron Golem and Skeleton all feel a little more substantial and unique. Speaking of unique, I loved the idea of adding the Warden, and would be very interested to see what this would realistically look like. And I would use Jesse from Story Mode and the Arch-Illager from Dungeons. Oh, and Steve of course. Tekken is a game I have a fair bit of experience with, but I wanted to see what the actual fans said, and shockingly, almost everyone said no Heihachi, as he's retired from the franchise and would not make for a great Tekken moveset. So, parking that idea, we'd have to have both Kazuya and Jin. My personal main is Yoshimitsu, and one of like 4 characters to have managed to be in every Tekken game, and he feels really obvious to include, but he also gets to rep Soul Calibur as he's also a mainstay in that series. After that, I also added Kuma and King, incredibly popular mainstays from the first game, who also add variety, and then I tried to think of characters that were introduced in later games. I personally love Eddie, and a Capoeira moveset would be awesome. Then Elisa feels like another great option from a more recent game in the series. And finally, I haven't played Tekken 8, but I was told that Reina is a significant character in that game, who also acts as a successor to Heihachi. And finally, Kingdom Hearts. I have, again, not played this even a little, and I have no idea who's who beyond Sora, and of course, the Disney characters who were ineligible. The options that popped up most often, quite convincingly actually, were Riku, Roxas, Aqua, Ansem, Xemnas, Terra, and Axel. This might all seem like it was a massive waste of time, and to that I say, yeah, duh, welcome to my YouTube channel. But I enjoy thinking up these things, and I think it's cool to delve into a franchise and bring up some awesome ideas for characters most would never consider. Kid Cobra, Dark Emperor, Mimikyu, Lord Frederick, Orcos, Plasm Wraith, Katrina, Professor Hector, the Ghosts, Nikki, Strider, Agent 8, the Warden, Most of these, most people would never consider without prompting, and this is what I love about these kinds of challenges. They force you to have to use a bit of creativity, and some pretty cool options can come from it. We need a bit more love for the obscure, the weird, and the unexpected choices.